Hi guys, we're going to start your second set of notes for topic 4, which is to actually start adding those rational numbers together that you learned about yesterday. So the first thing that I'm going to tell you are a couple different tricks or tips to help you remember how to add rational numbers. So if you're ready to get started, we can start with the first tip. So the first tip says that you can use symbols to represent positive and negative numbers. So right here, I'm going to put positive and negative numbers. Okay, so for those symbols, I'm going to go ahead and show you an example for both of these on what I mean. So you're going to have 4 negative numbers here. 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to make those negative by putting a negative sign in the middle of them. And then it looks like I have 7 positives. So I'm going to put 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 positive symbols. And then with that being said, you can go ahead and create your additive inverses, and we practiced that yesterday. So an additive inverse is when you add the same amount of a negative and a positive together to create a 0 or a 0 pair. So one negative and one positive create an additive inverse, and they would cancel out and create that 0 pair. So I can do that 1, 2, 3, 4 times. And whatever is left is going to give you your final answer. So it looks like I just have 3 positive chips left. I call them chips. They're like my symbols. So your answer of -4 plus 7 is actually a positive 3. Okay, and then you can do the same thing for this one. So for your first number, you've got -6. So I'm going to put 6 negatives here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then I have to add -4. So 4 more negatives. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, and if I look to go to cancel out or create those additive inverses, there are none to cancel out. So what I have there is my answer. So I have a bunch of negative chips there. So when I add all of those together, I get a total answer of -10. So -6 plus -4 gives me a -10. That's your first tip, is to use symbols to help you. Your second tip, it says that you can use the following phrase to help you. If it's the same, you add, and if it's different, you subtract. Okay? And what it means by that is when you're adding these two numbers together, if they have the same sign, meaning they're both positive or they're both negative, you're going to add the value together. If they are different, meaning one is positive and one is negative, then you will subtract those values and you will have your answer. You will always take the sign of the bigger value. And that's always going to be the first step that I'm going to do. Okay? So my first step is to always figure out which value is bigger, the positive or the negative. In this case, when I have 8 plus -2, my 8 is bigger, so I know that my answer is going to be positive. I'm always checking that first. Okay, then I look and I see that they have different signs. Since they have different signs, one is positive and one is negative, that means that I'm going to subtract the two number values, which means I'm going to subtract 8 minus 2, which gives me 6. And since I know the positive is bigger, I know that my answer is going to be a positive 6. Okay, let's do the second one. The second one has -2 and -5. The biggest number is a negative, so my answer is going to be negative. I always check to see if my answer is going to be positive or negative first. Then I'm going to look at the signs and see if they are the same and or if they are different. Since they are the same, they're both negatives, I'm going to add them together. So 2 plus 5 gives me 7. So then my answer is going to be -7. Because they're the same sign, I add them together and I took the sign of the bigger number, which was a negative. So my answer is -7. Okay, and then your third tip is going to be to create a number line to solve the problem. Number line. You're going to create a number line and you choose the number that you put on those number lines, making sure that it makes sense for your specific problem. You'll start with the first number in your problem, and you're going to put a dot to help you remember your starting point. Decide which direction you're going to go. If you are adding a positive, that means that you will move to the right. If you're adding a negative, you will move to the left. Okay? Whatever number you land on after moving is going to be your final answer. Okay, so I'll show you what I mean here. Let's go ahead and do this first one. Okay, so here's my number line, and I know I'm going to start at -8, and it looks like since I'm going to be adding a negative to it, I'm moving to the left. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put -8 over here, and then just keep adding -9, -10, -11, -12, -13. Hopefully your writing is a lot nicer than mine, -14. Okay, so then my first number, I'm going to put a dot on my first number. So my first number is -8, so I'm putting a dot here. Then it says I'm adding -5. Adding a negative means I'm moving to the left. So I have to move to the left 5 spots. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I landed on -13. So -8 plus -5 equals -13. Okay? Then I'm going to go ahead and do my second problem. So I have 2 plus 5. So when I create my number line, or I'm sorry, that's -2 plus 5. I know that I'm going to start at -2. So -2 has to be on my number line. Then I can go ahead and add the other numbers here. Okay, so my first number is going to be -2. So when I put my first dot, I'm putting it on -2. And I'm adding a positive, which means I'm moving to the right. And I'm moving to the right 5 spots because I'm adding +5. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I landed on +3. So -2 plus 5 is +3. So those are the 3 tips that you can use to help you solve adding rational numbers. However, sometimes the numbers are going to get bigger. So it's more than likely you're going to use the second tip to help you solve numbers that are larger or that are more rational numbers, meaning fractions and decimals. So I'm going to show you how to do that on the back. Okay, so let's go ahead and clear this up and go to the back here. So remember, for your steps to solve this on the back, it says you're going to look at your signs. If they are the same, we're going to add them together. If they are different, we are going to subtract. If it's the same, you add. If it's different, you subtract. Okay, and then you're going to add and subtract the numbers like normal, however you would add or subtract them. Okay, you're going to give your answer the sign, or you're going to give your answer the sign of the number with the larger numerical value. Numerical value, just like we practiced on the front. Okay, so if I look here, 5 plus -4, the 5 is a bigger value and the 5 is positive, so I know that my answer has to be positive no matter what. Then I'm going to look at the signs. The signs are different. Since the signs are different, that means I have to subtract those values. So 5 minus 4 is going to give me 1, which means my final answer is going to be a +1. Okay, now I'm going to move on to this decimal. First thing I'm going to check to figure out is if it's going to be a positive or a negative value. I look to see which one's bigger. My positive number is bigger, so my answer has to be positive. Now I check the signs. Do they have the same sign or different signs? They have different signs. Since they have different signs, that means that I'm going to subtract. So I'm going to take 57.5 minus 33.72, and I'm going to subtract those values, just like you would normally subtract. So when I subtract those values, I have to borrow. So I get positive, because I have a bigger number of positive, 23.78. Okay, now I'm going to practice with a fraction and with a word problem underneath. So if I scroll down here, I'm going to show you 2 different ways to do the fraction. So I'm going to split this in half. Okay, first I'm going to check to see what my answer is, if it's going to be a positive or a negative value. Look for the sign of the bigger number. So my bigger number is a negative, so my answer is going to be a negative. Okay, then I look to see if I'm going to have to add or subtract these values. Okay, when I look, they both have the same sign. Since they have the same sign, I'm going to add them together. So when I add them together, I have negative 5.5 plus negative 3 3/4. I can't add these fractions together because I don't have a common denominator. So I'm going to find a common denominator for 2 and 4. When I do that, I get 5 2/4 plus 3 3/4. Now I can add them together. So when I add them together, I add the whole numbers first and I get 8. And then I add the fractions together and I get 5/4. Well, 5/4 is an improper fraction, which actually equals 1 1/4. So I'm really going to add the 1 and the 8 together and keep my 1/4. So my final answer is 9 1/4. But remember, I have to have the sign, so it's negative 9 1/4. Now I'm going to do it the opposite way. Some people like to change them into improper fractions first and then add them together. So when I do that, I have 11 over 2 plus 12, 13, 14, 15 over 4. Then I have to find the common denominator of 4. And this one's already 4, so 15 is going to stay on the top, and 22 is going to be on top for my first fraction. When I add them together, I get 37 over 4. Which then when I divide 37 divided by 4, I get 9 with 1 left over, so it's 9 1/4. So my answer has got to be a negative, so my final answer is negative 9 1/4. All right, then the last problem is a word problem. So it says a submarine sits 500.5 feet below the surface of the water. Since it's below, that's letting you know that it's a negative value. So negative 5.5 feet below the surface. And then it dives down 45 1/4 feet more. So I'm adding an additional negative 45 1/4 feet because it's going down more. Okay, so I'm going to first determine what kind of sign it's going to be. Take the sign of the bigger number. So the bigger number is negative, which means my answer is going to be negative. Okay, then I'm going to go ahead and I can do it two ways again. One where you find a common denominator with the mixed number, and one where you change them into improper fractions. So for the first one, it would be negative 5 2/4 plus negative 45 1/4. Okay, so since they have the same sign, I'm going to add them together. So when I add them together, I get 545 3/4, and then my answer is a negative. So my answer is negative 545 3/4. If I change them into improper fractions, it would be 1,000, right? And 1 over 2 plus 181 over 4. Finding that common denominator makes it 2,002 over 4 plus 181 over 4. Then adding those together gives you 2,183 over 4, which then when you divide those two numbers gives you negative 545 3/4. So either way you do it, you're going to still get the same answer. Okay, once you've finished your notes, go ahead and get them checked by your teacher, and then we are going to do a whiteboard review activity today. So make sure everything's cleared off your desk and you're ready for the whiteboard activity.